Oh, hello there. As ever with English language and literature exams, exam technique is critical. It's all very well having a brilliant understanding of a text, in this case measure for measure, but if you don't give the examiner what he or she is looking for, you sure as hell ain't going to get that top grade. This video will give you crucial tips on exam technique for question B from the Shakespeare question for the OCR A-level English Literature, Drama and Poetry pre-900 paper and increase your chances of getting an A-star. So stay tuned, you're watching Schofield on Shakespeare.
Le grammatiche sono per me.
E poi non gosto se dá para não ser mordido.
Não vês que sou eu?
Let's kick off with the mark scheme for this question. There are two assessment objectives, AO1 and AO5.
So AO1 is about your arguments, informed by the breadth of your understanding about the text. It's about how well and how accurately you write. Whereas AO5 is about your exploration of different interpretations of the play. These might be performances on stage, in a film, or critical viewpoints published within articles, books, or production programs. Crucially, for the essay question, these are weighted equally. And what this almost certainly means in practice is that you will need to include far more critical viewpoints within your essays than you are doing at the moment. You also need to ensure that they are integrated fully within your argument, which isn't easy. Essentially, you can't write a really interesting argument, get to the end of the paragraph and think, oh, I just need to put in a critical viewpoint in the final two sentences. This won't cut the mustard. And so you may find some of my critical quotations helpful. These will appear on screen within 5-second intervals. Press pause to read through and jot down any that you find interesting or helpful. So let's now look at the top band of the mark scheme. Well, your argument and writing need to be excellent rather than good or competent. You need to be showing a consistently detailed understanding of the play, perhaps partly aided by numerous short, insightful quotations. It goes without saying that your writing needs to be brilliantly accurately written, and of course, the more you write and read essays, the more this will come. And consistently, throughout the course of your paragraphs, you need to be referencing, concurring with, and challenging critical viewpoints. Time for an exam-style question. Why not have a go at either writing this response in full or completing a couple of extensive paragraphs? In the Drama and Poetry pre-1900 exam, you will have a total of 2 hours and 30 minutes to get 60 marks. So if you want to stick approximately to exam conditions, allow yourselves around 40 minutes to do this. So get writing. Press pause now. This video will resume in 5 seconds time. Here's what I wrote within part of my response. Certainly the pair are united by their desire for Isabella, as implied by their shared subject in this statement about Thacker's 1994 production. Two of these middle-aged men come to life again, awakened by the power of a young, lovely and innocent girl. However, the way the two men approach their desires is very different. Angelo would appear to be extraordinarily naive when it comes to dealing with his own newly awoken sexual desires, Hence the explicit and authoritarian suggestion in Act 2, Scene 4 that Isabella must lay down the treasures of her body or else to let him suffer. Such an unequivocal declaration leaves him vulnerable to later accusations of impropriety and corruption. The irony is that the Duke almost certainly shares the same desires, but instead chooses to take advantage of his own position as Duke, as well as knowledge and power acquired during his disguise as Friar Lodewijk, to spring an unexpected marriage proposal upon Isabella in the closing moments of the play. Whereas Angelo appears to have no experience in the arts of seduction and sexual conquest, his prior relationship with Mariana seems remarkably chaste and conventional. The Duke had some feeling of the sport. He knew the service, at least according to Lucio. Now, Lucio is clearly someone who enjoys the sound of his own voice and amusing himself. Few will view this joking libertine as a completely trustworthy source. Nonetheless, some productions have taken Lucio's words at face value, notably Keith Hack's 1974 production, in which the Duke was the grand sexual manipulator and designer of the whole action, but also Thacker's 1994 production, in which we see the Duke slumped in front of large screen CD images at the beginning of the film. With these interpretations, we may choose to view the Duke as someone who has repeatedly manipulated Isabella, the nun in training, remember, into a position of such emotional fragility and dependence that she would not be able to turn down his marriage proposal and subsequent requirement for consummation. From his brazen declaration that Claudio's head is off and sent to Angelo, to his patronising comments about her being mad as I believe no other, to his coupling of his marriage proposal with the pardoning of her brother, for his sake is he pardoned, and for your lovely sake give me your hand, the Duke shows himself to be a far more sophisticated operator than his relatively simplistic, corrupted deputy. He has figuratively waterboarded Isabella into submitting to his desires in a way in which Angelo could never have conceived. Or put otherwise, his exercise in authoritarian repression has perfectly married the public and the private, a fresh start for Vienna and a fresh wife in the bedroom for him. This interpretation flatly contradicts any notion of the Duke having an ethical attitude exactly correspondent to Jesus, as Wilson Knight stated so memorably in the 1930s. Now think back to the mark scheme. How does my response meet the top band for AO1 and AO5 for this question? You can see the mark screen on screen now, and at 5-second intervals, my response will reappear so that you can ponder this question. Press pause to do this now.
What did you pick out? What notes did you make as a result? The longer you spend doing this, the more likely you are to approach your next essay in an even more thoughtful, productive way. It's too easy to churn out essays without thinking really sharply about what the examiner is looking for. Anyway, let's pick out a few features from this extended paragraph.
Feature number 1. Show the examiner that within your first main paragraph you are sharply focusing on the question, rather than, say, wasting time retelling a section of text. However, notice that I first seem to agree with the statement, at least in relation to the pair's feelings towards Isabella, before I move on to clarify my point, introduce a more sophisticated point by suggesting that their approaches to their desires may be very different. And in general, I feel the best responses will partly agree or partly disagree with a statement before going on with a yes but or a no but. You want your responses to show an awareness of the complexity of Shakespeare's characterization. Characters are never ever purely evil or purely good, or in this case, exactly the same. Notice also how I have introduced a critical interpretation very early on. Now, I haven't probed or explored it, and certainly I would need to do this later on in the paragraph. Nonetheless, it shows the examiner immediately that I have an awareness of the assessment objectives, and the reference seamlessly fits into my previous statements. Perhaps most importantly of all, it gives a different perspective to my writing and makes it more interesting. Remember also that you need to show both an understanding of particularly significant moments within the play, but also how these moments relate to the ideas and themes in the play as a whole. In Measure and Measure as an entire play, to what extent do you feel that the Duke and Angelo are two of a kind, peas from the same pot? Thus, you are likely to frequently reference events from the final scene in which the audience can judge how characters have evolved or not, perhaps, as the case may be. Point number 4 is ensuring that your argument is nuanced. Perhaps it would be tempting to quote Lucio's famous lines about the Duke having some feeling of the sport, but not to talk about his trustworthiness for fear of weakening the overall argument. Not so. By pointing out explicitly what his character is like, I'm showing that I have taken account of this in my analysis, and have even found some historical productions of the play which have made a similar point. And notice just how integrated the two references to different productions are, seamlessly introduced by the connective nonetheless. They help back up my point about the Duke being more sexually carnivorous and cunning than that failed, naive, wannabe predator, Angelo. Remember, AO1 requires you to demonstrate an excellent and consistently detailed understanding of the play. One way you can do this is by embedding numerous short quotations within your arguments, not to comment on the language, AO2 is not tested here, but to give really precise insight into key moments. Within the long sentence on screen, there are 3 different quotations taken from 2 different scenes. At the beginning of my paragraph, I stated, rather simply, that the Duke and Angelo both have sexual feelings for Isabella, though I quickly added that these feelings manifest themselves in different ways and through different actions. This argument has developed and evolved, so that here on screen, I argue that the Duke's sophisticated tactics enabled him to become extraordinarily successful in both his public and private spheres. Make sure that your argument goes somewhere, takes you somewhere, whilst always ensuring that it remains tightly focused on the question. And finally, there can be a misconception that literature essays need to be dull. They don't. In this section, I use the topical, controversial verb to waterboard to illustrate the disgusting way Isabella has been treated by her captor, and my phrase, fresh wife in the bedroom, is also intended to be a little close to the bone, but to implicitly reflect the Duke's misogynistic attitude towards his presumed-to-be wife.
This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production aimed at increasing your chances of achieving the full 15 marks in the OCR A-level Shakespeare essay question from the Drama and Poetry pre-1900 paper. I hope it's been helpful, and many thanks for watching.